welcome back everybody. We're now up to Unit 20 of this course. Getting excited. You can see by the hood, I'm still on the dark side of economics. So the previous unit I covered off on a few things. I talked about scarcity, I talked about banks, I talked about investment decisions, and I talked about debt. Today I'm going to go a little bit further, and it's still just as dark. Maybe some people might find it even darker. But anyway, let's get going. So the first thing I want to talk about is fear-mongering. So this is an interesting strategy. People often react out of fear. People often want things and want decisions made because they're afraid of something. Fear is a great motivator for change. And big businesses, governments and so on, they kind of know that. And they want to generate more fear so people support particular decisions. So this is not necessarily the market acting, but then this is about game theory. It's about imperfect information. It's about giving you a particular story, and you feel that you need to go along with that because you can't necessarily prove it or disprove it. So you end up going with the solutions that's being offered to you because that's what's going to keep you safe. And this fear-mongering leads you to support certain things. And in the context of government, I think that's probably the best example. Governments are going to be more likely to try and press and take away certain freedoms from you, simply because it is to protect you. Well, so they tell you. It also gives them more power as well. And a lot of people feel they're not in a position to argue because, well, some of these fear tactics seem fairly credible, especially the way the media presents certain things. It may exaggerate certain things and place certain emphasis on certain things. I'm not telling you it's necessarily lies, but often a particular emphasis on something, even if it's the truth, can make that something look a lot worse than it is. A good example of that would be terrorism. Fear-mongering through terrorism. How big a threat is terrorism to you actually? If it's constantly thrown out in the media, you're going to believe that terrorism is a major problem. You probably won't think that, hey, there's actually millions more people dying on the roads in car accidents than there are people getting killed in terrorism, but terrorism stuff gets reported and gets thrown in your face. And that is part of the whole fear-mongering thing done by the media. And the government can feed off of that by taking away particular freedoms, adding in particular security that gives them more power. And of course governments like to have more power, as I mentioned before. Power allows them to do more things. So be careful when, you hear about things, scary things. It's also worth doing your own research with today's technology and with the internet. There's a lot of alternative media out there. There's a lot of other websites as well. It's got great information to do your fact finding. What have we got next? Oh gosh, healthcare. That's another interesting one as well. And it's a little bit along the lines of fear-mongering too, in the sense that certain things are presented to you, like for example vaccines. I know a lot of people support vaccines and there's a lot of evidence that they do a lot of good things. There's also a lot of evidence that there are certain risks and dangers behind them as well, but this is not a vaccine presentation. There's also, you have to bear in mind as well, when you talk about healthcare, we have the market taking effect in the sense that with health, what do you have? You have cure, treatment, and prevention. What do you normally hear about in healthcare? Most of the money gets spent and devoted to treatment. Simply because treatment is the most profitable. Treatment doesn't cure you, so you have returning customers, which are your patients, so therefore that is more money. Cure is not as good, but there's still money in creating cures, without a doubt. A lot of the time that's not the case. And prevention, well, there's really no money in that either. Prevention doesn't work for the private sector because you prevent something, there's no money in that, simply because people won't be coming back for treatments or cures, etc. And the same for government. And the things with government, they actually like problems because they want to solve problems, because solving problems shows there's a particular relevance and a particular need for government. Remember, we go back to needs and wants. They need to demonstrate that you need them, create demand for having a larger government. So, again, that works very nicely for treatment and why treatments are there and why government should be spending more money on treatments, why government should be building more hospitals and hiring more doctors and more nurses and more rooms to facilitate treatments, and treatments that are again served by the private sector. Another area I want to look at is law and order, or law enforcement. This is an interesting one as well. Almost all countries in the world have prisons. It seems to be a universal fact that if someone commits a crime, you throw them into prison. If there are other solutions, again, that might not work particularly well because, again, to fund prisons, you need money to fund prisons. You need to hire staff to operate prisons. You need to hire law enforcement to arrest people. You need to have a judiciary system, and lots of things of money is going around. And there is a lot of money to be made out of crime. Not necessarily the criminals itself, but in the sense of all the money that's being pumped into it. And also, you know, it's a thing the government can say, we are protecting you, so they hire more police officers. So it all sort of works around that. Again, you're stimulating and creating a demand for something. And in reality, there could be much better ways of dealing with crime other than throwing people in prison, other than getting more and more police officers. But more and more police officers, of course, means more power for the government and for them to show their power. So it comes back to that again, the show of power. Next one I want to talk about is war. I think we're getting really dark on this, but you go back throughout the ages. War has been something that's continuous, especially with large empires. You go back to the Roman Empire. They engaged in war, and why was one of the reasons that they waged war? Because it's profitable. They sack countries, they take their resources, they own more land, they have more land to give to people, so it is profitable. And it's also a way of them rewarding the people that they hire. It's a way of people having confidence in them to show that they are very good at their job. And not an awful lot has changed. You look at what are the new empires of the world. Take, for example, the United States. I guess technically you wouldn't call it an empire because they don't own or control, should I say, lots and lots of countries around the world. But they use military force to somewhat affect how particular countries are run. So a more favourable government for them, they can put their troops in there and attack them. And a lot of that's happening in the Middle East. They're creating alliances there that works in favour of themselves. So waging war is also profitable from that aspect because you can threaten other countries so that they're more likely to work with you. Another aspect as well is, what does war do? It causes a lot of damage and destruction. You need people to fix that up, and that creates demand, again, for construction. And from that side of things, war potentially can be very profitable by having construction services filling in the gaps of where all things have been destroyed and you're replacing them. So you're stimulating demand through war. I know it sounds awful, but that is the use of economics. I want to talk to you now about, as you can see here, the two-party system. But again, this is what more related to, I'd say, game theory. It doesn't necessarily relate just to political parties, but I'll start with that first of all. So in many countries, you'll find that in many democracies, you have a two-party system. And a two-party system is much more easy to manipulate than having multiple parties, simply because they can tic-tac between each other and can control various issues. And we can look at that also in the context of sports as well. Like look at the National Football League. National Football League in itself is an identity, and it's basically focused around entertainment. The teams themselves don't necessarily need to be profitable by themselves as long as they bring in more revenue for the NFL itself. So if you look at that from that point of view, you have what many people refer to as controlled opposition. You focus to control a particular output that works more for the bigger picture. Like, for example, the NFL, the biggest focus will be creating more entertaining games. And that's one of the reasons why there's been these rule changes that basically produce higher scoring games. A lot of the rule changes in favour of the offense. So you just have to look at the numbers and the scores. There's a lot more closer games, and there's a lot more games that are higher scoring. The closer games are in part to do with what they call the salary cap. So again, there's a much smaller gap between the richer teams and the smaller teams simply because they can't pay their players too much, and therefore the top players will then have to move to the weaker teams in order to get the higher salaries. So that makes it closer and it makes it more high scoring. And all of that is entertainment value, and some people might think that's great, but some people might not like it as much because, you know, they want to look at sports as seeing which team truly is the best, and that should be more of the focus. Alright, that takes me to the end of part 2 of the dark side. Hopefully you enjoyed it, hopefully it didn't get too dark. I know some of you will be cringing at some of the things I say, you're thinking like, oh, could that really be the case? But you're thinking about it. If economics supports it, and if a particular action is to your benefit or to the benefit of government or a large organisation, it is definitely possible. A lot of people get hung up thinking, you know, these people have a moral obligations, therefore they will stick with it. But that's almost certainly not the case. They are operating within their own best interests, not your best interests. There is such a thing known as altruistic behaviour and psychic income, where people actually gain value out of helping other people, but it's very unlikely we would see that with governments and with large corporations, because people got in these positions to begin with because of their quest for power and quest for money and the quest for profits. So you have to bear that in mind as well, the very nature of the people that are rising to these positions. Okay, hopefully this hasn't deterred you too much. The next unit I'm going to be looking at economic modelling, so it's going to be more on the lighter side, and then we're going to be looking at how economics can be used to make your life better. So we're going to depart from the dark side now, we'll pull down the hood, and I will see you soon. Also remember to have a little crack at the questions as well.